A warm welcome to each one of you, folks who are online, folks who are here in person. So glad to see your faces and to see us gathered here. And before I get to the program, just a couple of announcements. So this coming Sunday, December 8th, is, according to the Zen tradition, the celebration of Buddha's enlightenment. So we'll have brunch right after the Dharma talk. So starting at 10:30. And it's a potluck, and please RSVP if you're planning on coming. We'd love to have as many people as possible. And also December 15th is the first of our virtual Buddhist art tours. So that will be, yes, hopefully I will get an opportunity to share just some of the things that I've been learning over the last year, and also just for us to think about how these images came to be and how they relate to experiences on the path. And so with that, I think we would just go ahead and continue on with the usual Tuesday tune-in program. So that means about half an hour or so of guided meditation. And doing our best not to be distracted by Nino's complete antics. And then I'll offer a Dhamma talk, and then we'll have plenty of time for reflections, questions, comments, and sharing of the merits at the end, or dedication rather of the merits at the end. So with that, I think for this evening, what I would like to do is, once we get settled into our posture and our bodies, is maybe to do a bit of contemplation on cessation. So just noticing the ending of a sound, or the ending of the breath, or the end of a thought. Just really allowing ourselves to note the endings of things. But before that, we'll go ahead and begin to settle into meditation posture. And really take a few moments to relax, to find a position that feels balanced, feels as comfortable as you can get at this moment, at this place. Relaxing the belly and really allowing the body to settle right here in this place, in this time. Tuning into the natural stability of the body. And as the bones of the spine come into alignment, and perhaps they can carry the weight of the body and the muscles around the ribs and the shoulders, and just become softer and wider. Other thoughts and perceptions might be passing through the mind. You are just resting on the sensation of the body and the sitting posture. And as you are more present in each moment, you might just begin to notice cessation happening moment by moment. The end of a sound, the end of a breath, the end of a thought. Just noting the endings. Staying curious about moments of cessation and just observing the endings of phenomena. No need to strain in any way. Endings just happen naturally, and it's enough just to be present for them. And by studying the cessation of phenomena like breath or thought, then you become aware that each thing has its moment of cessation. Being curious about endings, willing to observe the moments where each phenomena comes to its close. Now, as we come to the last few moments of the meditation, I'm going to ring the bell twice. And for that first bell, I suggest that you just listen. Just listen for the end of the bell. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. As I mentioned earlier, in the Japanese Zen Buddhist tradition, this is a time of year to remember the Buddha's awakening, the historical person who discovered this path of practice and enlightenment. And so I want to talk a little bit about him and about his experience of discovering the path. And then maybe on Sunday, I'll talk a little bit about that awakening and what he taught after the awakening. But first, there is the effort. First, there is the effort, even for the Buddha. So the Buddha was born Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born to one of the ruling clans in an area of northern India called Magadha. And more or less, around 526 BC or so, give or take, 50 or 70 years. And he had a very comfortable upbringing, and eventually realized the problem of his own reaction to the fact that people get sick, get old, and die. So it was really his mortality, his awareness of his own mortality and of everyone's mortality that actually launched him on the path. So yes, there he is, according to some accounts, 29 years old. He leaves his family. He leaves this very comfortable life to go and become a spiritual seeker, a dropout, in a sense, from the society of his time. And so he cuts off his hair and he starts practicing with a couple of the key meditation teachers of his time, Alara Kalama and Udakarama Buddha. And it's said that he learned some of the very, very sublime concentration states from them. He was a very, very good meditator. And but he realized that those things actually weren't the culmination of the path. That he would get up from these incredibly sublime states of incredibly calm and focused and bright states of mind. And then he would still have a mind full of conflict and unwholesome states and worries and difficulty. And there was a group of 5 other ascetics who became kind of part of his circle, so to speak. So he and the 5 ascetics left the meditation masters and decided, well, there's got to be some other way. This isn't resolving the problem, so there's got to be some other way. And so the next thing that he describes is that he gives up the whole idea of concentration, actually, I believe, because the next thing that he tries is he tries to force his mind to be free of suffering. He says he crushed his mind with his mind, like a strong person would throw a weaker person on the ground. And interestingly, I want to read a little something from that part. Let's see if I can find it here. I didn't actually bring the book that has that. Venerable Anala's translation. So this is Venerable Nyanamali's translation of a book of various suttas, and it's called The Life of the Buddha. And what he does is he inserts the commentaries as narrators, so to speak, in between his versions of the suttas. But let's see if I can find this. Yeah, so he says, I constrained and crushed my mind with my mind. Sweat ran from my armpits with the effort that he was making, right? So you can imagine what this is like. This is like he's really going all out. And then he says this, which I thought was very interesting. He says, though tireless energy was aroused in me, unremitting mindfulness was established, and yet my body was overwrought and not calm. So it's an interesting moment because he realizes that this way of trying to force the mind to be peaceful actually won't bring that calm that he's looking for, right? It might bring a momentary ability or, for him, hours or days of unremitting mindfulness and tireless energy, but that's not the culmination, right? That's not the actual goal that he's looking to attain. So he goes on from there, from the control of the mind and this kind of forceful effort, and he decides that he's going to try to hold his breath. And maybe that will create some kind of shift, bodily shift. So you can see that he's going further and further away from concentration. And he's trying to kind of grapple with the physicality of the practice. But he holds his breath, he says, until it felt like his head was splitting. And he had tremendous pain in his head. So now, that might seem to us today like a direction you probably wouldn't go in. But, you know, if you think about it in terms of the culture of the time and the sort of different, you know, possibilities of practice, and just thinking about the way that people understood the relationship of the body and the mind, that to him it seemed like, well, maybe this might work. Maybe this might make some kind of dramatic shift. But then again, he realizes again that it's not working. Yeah. And so there's a kind of sincerity, there's a kind of humility, right? That he says, okay, well, got to try something else. Going to try something else. So even the Buddha had to do some trial and error. Right? So remember that when you're having difficulty in your own practice, that sometimes you need to just try something new. Sometimes you need to just acknowledge that the particular way that you're doing something isn't working for you right then. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Even if it worked for somebody else, even if somebody told you that's what you should be doing, sometimes you just have to make a different choice. And be honest with yourself about your own experience. So then the Buddha decides, okay, I'm going to try, we're still grappling with the physicality of the practice. He says, okay, well, I'm going to try fasting. Right? Very popular practice then, very popular practice apparently today. Right? Fasting. And so, but the Buddha was very extreme in his form of practicing fasting. He became really, really deeply emaciated. He said that his skin turned very dark. His hair started falling out. Right? So all of these things are what? Our efforts at control, our efforts toward forcing a particular kind of experience. And the Buddha eventually, he says that the Deva started talking to him because he had set the determination that he was just going to fast until the end, until he either died or he was awakened, one or the other. And the Devas say, no, 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 don't do that. So now, okay, we might think of the Devas as angels or as deities, kind of like in the Greek sense of the way that people of the Greeks understood gods, deities. But so, or maybe these are his inner voices, right? We might interpret this in a more modern contemporary fashion to say these are the Buddha's inner voices grappling with this question. It's up to you how you want to interpret the way that he told the story, the record that we have of the way that he told the story. Huh? But so what happens is that he has to reflect now, okay, if the fasting isn't going to work, because he said, he reflected, even if I died, that wouldn't resolve the problem necessarily, right? Especially if in his context where there was an understanding of rebirth or reincarnation of some sort. No? So he says, okay, even dying isn't going to solve it. No? So he has to reflect for a moment on, well, then what's the next step? Because obviously this is not going well, right? This is not going to the end of suffering. If your goal is the end of suffering, this isn't going there, clearly. And this is the key point that I want to talk about tonight. So sorry for the long lead up. But the key point that I want to talk about tonight is this turning point where the Buddha reflects on something that happened in his childhood. He thinks back to a moment when he was a child, and his dad, his father, King Suddhodana, was working in the field. And by this, it's meant actually, what the commentaries explain is that it was the festival of sowing the seeds for planting. And so the king was out there with the workers, and they're having a bit of a, celebration and a moment commemorating that the sowing is going to happen and wishing for blessings and things like that. And in the meantime, Siddhartha at that time goes and sits under a rose apple tree. And he has an experience of deep calm. He has an experience of the mind becoming concentrated and clear and calm. And when he remembers that, he says, ah, right. Maybe that's the way to go. Maybe that is the way to find this, some other means of working with the mind, some other means of finding this ultimate peace that I'm looking for. And so he realizes, oh, but with the body this weak and emaciated, it's not going to be possible actually to bring up that kind of joy that's needed for that state. It's not going to be possible to actually experience the pleasantness, bodily pleasantness that's needed to support that first jhana, that first concentration state. So I better start eating a little bit so that I can bring myself into my body into a state where I can do that. And then his 5 friends decide, oh, no, now he has, quote unquote, reverted to a life of luxury because he decides to take a little bit of food. But the reason why I tell this story, and I think that a really important part of this message that often gets overlooked, is this beautiful capacity for reflection. To reflect on what has gone well, to reflect on the times when we have experienced some relaxation in the body or some peace of mind. To bring that back into awareness and let that be a motivator. Not something that you long after, not something that you're trying to replicate, right? We cannot replicate moments, actually. That's not how it works. In fact, I would say trying to recreate a state that some meditative state that you experienced in the past is a good recipe for not being able to get there. Because there's just too much self involved. There's just too much sort of intentional motivation involved. But this recollection of previous states of well-being or of peace or of joy or of clarity of mind is a very useful tool. So much so that the Buddha, there's a word for this. There's actually a word for this. And it comes, we see this word at various places in the suttas, but the one that comes to me right now is this, in the Numbered Discourses from the chapter of 11, the first and second of those 2 discourses are basically the same, one forward and one backward. And the Buddha says, a person who lives an ethical life is naturally free from remorse, free from regrets about that life. And a person who is free from regrets is naturally able to experience this thing called pamoja, which is a kind of joy, reflecting on doing the right thing in your life, or practicing, or moments when your practice was actually working well. Yeah. So I think about it as like the pat yourself on the back moments, right? These are the pat yourself on the back moments. Right. It actually did happen. There actually is this possibility. I have known moments where I saw a bit of peace or a bit of relaxation or a bit of clarity or some kind of aha, or some time when it felt like, yeah, I was really kind of clicking, or I had an understanding, an insight, right? You can reflect on these things as a way to bring joy into your practice. And so that's what the Buddha did. And that was a key turning point for him, because it's at that point that he says, yes, of course, I don't need to be afraid of joy. I don't need to be trying to crush all the joy out of my life. That's not going to lead to enlightenment. These kinds of wholesome joys, these wholesome joys are actually very helpful for the mind. So it's also a point at which the Buddha shifts from a kind of effort at control and restriction to a practice which is working together with the mind, right? Because the mind wants to experience pleasant states. We know this, right? It's easier to stay with something that's pleasant rather than something that's unpleasant. So the Buddha says, great, then remember the pleasant things from your practice so that your mind will be willing to be with that and to be brightened by that and to build upon that. Yeah. And in fact, interestingly, going even a bit further, then later, and we don't know exactly when later because the commentaries aren't dated and they're not signed. We don't know who it was, when, or where the commentaries to the suttas were created. But what we see later in the commentaries is we also see with the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 4th factor is piti, right? It's joy. And of the conditions for bringing forth joy, it says reflecting on your ethics, reflecting on your previous joys, reflecting on your previous tranquility. Let me see if I reflecting on your virtue, reflecting on peace. Reflecting on inspiring suttas, things, moments of uplifted inspiration from the teachings, are also the factors that will help new joy to arise. Yeah. So it becomes this beneficial cycle, this positive cycle, this, right? Rather than this kind of downward spiral, is this more like an upward spiral? And it's also here where the Buddha begins to talk about his experience of his practice much more gently. He's still striving, he's still making an effort, but he speaks about what he sees and the insights that he has in terms of brightness and knowledge and joy and clarity instead of pain and suffering and sweating. Yeah. So when we see this kind of admonition over and over again in the suttas, that we need to strive, that we need to make an effort, that we need to persist, that we need to apply our energy, right? So, because effort is the 3rd of the 4 factors of awakening. Or actually, wait, did I get that right? Yeah. The key to understanding that kind of exertion, as distinct from the kind of exertion I was talking about earlier, right, where you're trying to recreate a state, for example, recreate some kind of meditative state, is The effort, a strong effort to be in harmony with what's happening, to be in harmony with the bright, the light, the clarity. And the more that you can do that, the more that you lean into that, then the more that that opens up. So as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Buddha actually woke up to and how those last moments were on Sunday. But for now, I want to tell you a little bit more about that moment, because later on, he again is talking about some encounters toward the very end. He talks about Mara. So Mara is a being that is understood to be very harmful, a being that is trying to keep people from peace or from the end of suffering. So sometimes Mara gets described as the devil. I'm not so sure about that, but certainly he is a trickster and a difficult being. It's said actually that Mara is like a role, like a hat that you wear. It's like a job that you have for a certain lifetime. Or you could think of Mara as being like what we would in Jungian psychology call the shadow, right? The shadow of the personality, the dark side. Yeah. So Mara's armies are attacking the Buddha, and these flying, flaming arrows are coming at him in these, moments as he's nearing awakening. This feeling of being attacked, or this feeling of, you might imagine, kind of a great internal agitation, like, wow, a battle. And what does the Buddha describe? He doesn't go to battle with Mara. Right? He says he turns those flaming arrows into flowers. So that is the Buddha's very poetic way, I believe, of saying that he meets his inner struggles with kindness, with gentleness, with beauty. He meets his inner struggle with some gentleness. Right? You don't go to battle. You don't try to throw down the weaker man or clench your teeth and grit it out. Right? You meet those flaming arrows with flowers, with gentleness. Right, okay, here it is. It takes two to have a battle, two parts of yourself sometimes. Yeah? So set down that part. Don't go to battle with that other part. That doesn't help. When you get into a struggle with your own mind, that isn't going to resolve the problem. That's actually adding more energy into a situation that already has a lot of energy. Yeah. So try softer. Don't try harder, try softer. Because think about it. How else is suffering going to come to an end? If not with gentleness. Mm-hmm. So then we have three parts to this story today, just to sum it up again. Right? So the first part is knowing when it's not working, acknowledging when it's not working, and making a shift. Being willing to just say, okay, with humility, right, this isn't working, I'm going to try something else. This is just bringing more suffering, I'm going to try something else. Have the courage to know when to say when, right? And then the second part is remember your wins. Remember the good moments. Remember the joys. Remember all those good choices that you made, all those good ethical choices that you made. Remember every minute you sat on a cushion, no matter what the experience was. Remember the goodness that you're creating with your practice. Remind yourself of that again and again and again. Not in a sense of longing for it to repeat itself, because that, again, isn't how our experience goes. Each experience, each moment is going to be unique. But in the sense of knowing that it's possible and knowing that you've put in those positive conditions. You've added those beneficial things to your stew. So I often think about my practice that way. I think about my practice being like a big, big pot of stew. And I try to put in all the beneficial things. And then you have to wait for it to become soup, of course, right? You add all the ingredients you want, but you have to wait for it to cook, to ripen, to be ready. And then, so those were the first two things. And then the third thing is gently, gently, friends, gently. Don't struggle with yourself if you can help it. Just be kind when those struggles appear. Be gentle with them. Meet them with flowers. Don't hold on to those arrows, right? Don't hold on to those arrows. And don't throw them back. Just meet them with flowers. Gently, gently. And if you put those three kinds of activity into your practice, I suggest that, like the Buddha, what you will see is that that helps you to work together with the natural tendencies of the mind and the natural tendencies of the body, and our ability for awareness to become clear. That capacity for awareness to become clear is right here. Mm. Okay. That's the Dhamma talk for this evening. We have plenty of time for questions or reflections or corrections or concerns about the meditation or about the talk. Mhm. Deborah, would you mind using the mic? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Aya, for that talk. I find myself with a curiosity. I'm familiar with the story that you told. The one part that seemed a little new to me was that he had gone first to the meditation teacher. And then he had reached the jhanas, the very deep states of concentration practice. And then when he was remembering how he sat under the flowering tree as a child, that he also had slipped into the first jhana as a child naturally. And so I was just reflecting as you were speaking this time about, you probably know exactly where I'm going, but he from that second time of reflecting back on when he had gone into that first state so easily, but that he hadn't remembered that, or that hadn't happened when he was doing the deep meditations the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking about, what was the difference between those two? And one was he was actually in it, and then the second one he was reflecting back on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just interested in your answer to why that first round of jhanas. Did he have to just go through everything else and then get to that reflection? Because that really was the pivot point.
Yes, and Stig's often asked this question too, because I think related to Stig's question sometimes around this. So yes, so he actually went to 2 teachers before he started these heavy ascetic practices, and with Uddaka Ramaputta, he experienced all the way up to, I think it's like the 6th jhana, and then with Alara Kalama, he went up to the 7th jhana. And there are 8 that he describes ultimately. But somehow the interesting part is the joy. That was the difference that he saw between how he had experienced it as a child and what it was that he felt was missing at this point in the path, on the path. So somehow he was entering into these concentration states. They were, all of them, Uddaka Ramaputta, and had a whole community, actually. Both of them, these 2 meditation teachers, had meditation communities of folks who were following them. Somehow they were doing that without the joy, yeah. So there's something about that piece of it where he was able to still the mind, but he wasn't actually able, again, to take that out of the concentration state and apply it to the insight state, because there wasn't the joy that had, brightened the mind in that way. So when he describes the jhanas, and we don't know whether this is different, I assume that it is, that when the Buddha describes the jhanas, he describes piti and sukha, joy and bliss or contentment, as being 2 of the 5 key factors that you have to have in order for the jhana to lead to where you want it to go, to where you need it to go. So that's really, I think, what the key was for him. It's like he learned the jhanas, he learned these meditation states, these very calm, concentrated states, but he wasn't able to convert that into the other factors of awakening that were needed, right? So he had the tranquility and the concentration, but he was missing, and he had the energy, obviously, because he was doing that, and the mindfulness, right? And he said he could establish the mindfulness, but the joy and the equanimity was missing, right? There's those 2 factors were somehow not there. Yeah. Yes, Dick.
Yeah, it seems like he's missing the middle way when
Exactly.
that's the problem and so he discovers the middle way, and that's the joy, the coming and going, and the process of falling in and out of discovery, and it's functionally not practical to live your life in jhanas, which is then not a resolution on living. So that's, I don't know, but yeah, that's the way I see it. I mean, it's a very interesting, a good question, Deborah, and you're right. It's one that I have really speculated about quite a bit. So yeah, it's good to hear that take again. But I come back to this middle ground. The middle ground is really the
Yes.
tasting life in its fullness, and you're missing that fullness when you're off in the extreme of those deeper states.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And indeed, that is the first thing that he teaches the five ascetics right after his awakening. That's the first thing that he says is don't mortify the body because that's not helpful, and don't live a life of sensual indulgence because that's also not helpful. You have to find this middle way. And yes, and the irony of it, of course, is that we all sort of bounce back and forth between this various aspects of what we think is the middle way. The middle way is pretty broad, right? That gives us, there's a lot of range in there, right? So you can sit until your knees hurt, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's really okay for you for what you need to do that day, But yeah. Or you can do the opposite, right? You can just be going through the motions. You can, some people have sometimes said that to me, I went on retreat and here I am, and I'm not able to actually really kind of get into it at all. I'm just kind of wandering around and I'm not really feeling like doing the practice very well. So, there's all these ways in which we tend to kind of bounce back and forth between the indulgence and the strictness. And so finding that, right, so the metaphor that the Buddha gives, he gives many metaphors for this in practice, but the one that's often referred to is the metaphor of the lute, right, as a stringed instrument, right? And he says if you turn the strings too tight, then they snap, right? Or it doesn't play music. Even if they don't stop, it doesn't play the right sounds, right? Or if you loosen the strings completely, then it also doesn't play, right? It doesn't play well. So to find that beautiful balance of effort and intention and surrender, right? All of that is all in there. And I think this is also why of the 37 aids to awakening, 9 of them are energy. He talks about effort and energy over and over and over and over again. He teaches about it many, many, many different ways in many, many different frameworks. He brings it up as a key aspect of the path because it's also something that's very subtle exploration, right? Literally, from moment to moment, or day to day, today, we can be conducting this exploration, right? What's the right amount of effort here? How to apply myself fully, but not straining. Yeah. Yes, Chris.
So first, I can never hear the story of the Buddha's over-efforting and efforts at control enough. So thank you again for telling that story. And every time I hear it, I'm like, oh yes, even the Buddha. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
But my question goes to the third part. You said there were 3 teachings, essentially in the story tonight, and I want to go to the third part. I feel like I have heard and internalized, perhaps not so much from your teaching, but from other teachings from teachers in kind of the Western Buddhism tradition, this whole notion of like, you have to be present for your suffering. You have to turn to your suffering. You have to be with your suffering. And I think what I'm hearing in your last part is the how to do that in a way that maybe I haven't understood or internalized enough, and which sounds very different than a different kind of stewing that you're talking about. So I don't know if you can just talk a little bit more about like that piece of it, because obviously there is suffering and the mind at times is obviously very caught with that, or there's suffering in our lives, like externally. And yeah, just a little bit more like how to be with that in this way that you're sort of talking about in terms of gently and with flowers.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And here I agree. I think that what I'm sharing here or I think I heard you say that what I'm sharing here is perhaps slightly different than what you might hear in from other Buddhist teachers, but you could take that in whatever way you want. But some people will say, embrace your suffering, embrace, right? You need to embrace the things that are bothering you or your anger or whatever it is. And, I cringe when I hear that. I really feel sad when I hear that, because I feel like, to me, that sounds like clinging. That sounds like the ultimate way of clinging even more to your suffering, One of my students in a long time ago, in one of the longer lay practice periods, year-long lay practice periods at San Francisco Zen Center, said, I figured out that I was praying to the altar of my suffering, right? So that's what she was doing, and that's how she expressed her clinging, right? Then there's the other side, which is, I don't want it. It shouldn't be like that. Cut it off, right? This is the Buddhas, right? Cut it off. No more. It shouldn't be like that. Reject, 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 and people can use the practice in that way. Also, one of the things you sometimes hear is this kind of like replacement, right? If you're having a thought that's bringing you suffering, then you just replace it with something nice. You just replace it with metta. If you think I hate that person, then you replace that with metta. And I think, oh no, that it's just aversion, right? That's just another form of reactivity. You're just right. So don't do the embrace and don't do the pushing away, but meet the thing. And so by meet the thing, I mean a way of attending to it with an acknowledgement, right? And sometimes this can take a form of like a labeling, if we can do a labeling without getting into a lot of judgment, right? But like unpleasant Vedana, unpleasant. I'm pissed off and it's really unpleasant. Okay, I got that, right? I acknowledge that. I can say it out loud to myself. I can feel that feeling, feel the burn, and acknowledge that either out loud or not. Yeah. So there's that kind of awareness, intentional acceptance, and that's it. And then you move on to the next thing. And maybe the next thing is another moment of being pissed off, or the next thing is you laughing at you, saying out loud to yourself the burn of being pissed off, or whatever it is, right? Then taking it another notch, I would say the next way of working with it is where, and this is a little bit harder, I think, a little bit more subtle, is that you try to, and in the words are not that precise, but you try to step closer and closer into your experience, into intimacy with your experience. Try to minimize the gap of feeling like there's this person happening over here, and it's relating to this feeling. And the reason why I say that the words are imprecise is because there is really no gap there, right? That's just a phenomena. That's actually a delusion that we have, that there's some part of the mind that's somehow separate from another part of the mind, because the mind is actually a stream. But in any event, try to eliminate that gap of relating to things at all, and just be the thing. Just be the burn. Just be the thing itself. My master used to say this until he was blue in the face. And I swear for the longest time, I didn't have any clue what he was saying. But now I get it completely, which is that if you completely eliminate that gap between the thing experienced and the knowing of the experience, right, then it's just what it is. It's just a phenomena. It is absolutely a phenomena without any possibility of anything, really, of even like any possibility of harm, any possibility of persistence, any possibility of defining you, any possibility of relationship. It's just a phenomena. And that's hard, right? That kind of being the thing itself without a relationship to it is a kind of surrender, is a kind of giving over to experience without defining you anymore. And so that's why it's hard. I hope that helps.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yes, Hamza, please.
Well, I'm not sure if I got lost in the last bit that you were saying, because my mind went into like Namarupa, the dependent origination piece. So is that interrelated with Namarupa, or did I just veer off on another track?
Okay, so let me see. It is related to Namarupa in the sense that any experience requires a degree of consciousness and attention and so on in order for it to be known, right? So I suppose that what I'm asking is, yes, that the nama part, right? That attention is allowed to fill the whole space rather than a kind of having the thought relating to the thought, which is what papancha is, right? And that's where this other track, wrong track goes.
In a sense, is that awareness of awareness? Or am I?
Well, it's just the awareness. The awareness fills up the whole space, and there's no awareness of awareness needed because awareness fills up the whole space, right? Awareness is there already as an experience, otherwise the experience can't be known. So awareness of awareness would be more like the jhana state, actually, right? Where the mind is relating to itself, and it drops off the body, it drops off the feeling of rupa, and the mind is just relating to, you could say, the sort of mental experience of breath, or the mental experience of earth, or the mental experience of metta. But that, again, is like what's happening there. What's really happening there is that the mind stream looks back at a previous moment. The thought, this moment of awareness is looking back at a previous moment of thought.
That's what you were referring to.
No, that's the relationship. That's the idea that we have, that there's a relationship, that there's some mind that has a relationship to being angry, for example. That I say, oh, here I'm feeling anger, and anger is unpleasant. There's this I that's feeling anger, and there's some other part of the mind that's observing the anger. That's not angry. That's just watching the anger, right? So that's the sense of separation. And what I'm saying is, when that collapses, then there's no need for the mind stream to keep jumping back and taking a previous moment as the object. You're just taking the moment as the object, because that's it. There isn't any separation.
Like it takes me back to the Bahia Sutta.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
When thought is just thought, when the heard is just the heard, when the known is just the known, when the felt is just the felt, then there's no you in there.
And there's no gap.
In the middle, exactly, or outside of that. There's no nothing, there's no self, there's just the phenomena itself, and there cannot be any friction then. And if we think about dukkha, dukkha is that friction. Because you have then it's just the thing. And it's not this kind of push-pull anymore.
Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you for the questions. All right. It appears that we have come to the end of our time together. So, may the merits of our practice be a condition for the awakening, for our own awakening, for the awakening of all beings, known and unknown, seen and unseen, that all beings might be free from mental and physical suffering, that all beings might find their path to absolute peace. By the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts, may all beings be liberated. Okay, friends. Lovely to see you. Be well.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dhammadipa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.